Hey everyone, and welcome to another Monday night. And tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Pink over there.
Hi everyone.
So, yeah, tonight's a bit of an Age of Sigmar night, really. If people can just say whether the sound's okay or not as well. I'm getting a tiny bit of feedback from Mr. Pink, but I don't know whether everybody else can pick that up or not. Hopefully not. So, yeah, let us know if all the audio is good, but if not, we're going to get straight on with the show. And tonight is Age of Sigmar, and we covered it a little bit 2 weeks ago. I've had a bit of a break. I was off last week, and it was an enforced break because all of my technology failed. We had a thunderstorm and lightning, and that tripped the power and blew out my network and everything, so it was rather dramatic. There was blood, sweat and tears that day, but unfortunately no show. But we're back now. Pink, you need to say something.
Stormcast approaching.
So, right, shall we have a quick look at who's in the chat, and then we're going to get straight into this. So, we've got quite a lot to go through as well, haven't we? We've just been having a chat about what we should and shouldn't cover about tonight. I think there's quite a lot already come out about the new edition. We're going to jump around a few things, so we're going to look at things like command abilities, shooting, the new pile-in. I think's caused quite an excitement. But if anybody wants to kind of bring anything up in the chat, then fire away. Give me a @WargamerOnline. So just as Slippy Tiger's just done, so I can see what people are saying. Phil, I have taken the plunge. In my 7th edition dwarves are free from the loft, and I have a happy little dispossessed army. Awesome, brilliant. I was looking at dispossessed last night. You know, Pink, I started browsing through Free Peoples last night as well, actually looking at those, because they've got some wicked models. You know, the big like vehicles and the strange carts and stuff.
Yeah, and if you were to paint up some colourful pantaloons, that's definitely the army for you. It's like the Harlequins of the Age of Sigmar.
Right, okay, let's have a quick look at who's in the chat, and then let's get into this. Coleman's there, good old Coleman, thank you very much. Sean is in there, Sean Blake. Chaos Sponge, Garbis is in there as well. Steve Forrest is in there. Who else have we got? Brush for Hire. Ralph is in there. Mark's in there, previously MCM 1966. So hey Mark Malt, how you doing? We still need to chat. Thanks for messaging me back. It's been a crazy week, but we will chat soon. Matthew Pink is there as well. That's awesome. You're in two places at once, which is always good. We can't really go too far without mentioning, of course, Sam is in the chat as well, who's currently on holiday.
He never really gets away.
No, he doesn't. And this show is essentially brought to you by the Sam Stocks Pet Care Company, because I'm currently looking after Khaleesi. And Mr. Pink, who have you got back there with you?
I've got Stewie with me, and I'm very aware that if you see me looking behind me every now and then, it's to make sure he's not chewing on any cables, because I want to give him back in one piece.
We've just done the damage comparison, haven't we? Stewie's been chewing away at your racking, and Khaleesi has taken a shine to an oak pillar that holds my second floor up. This piece of oak is goes back as far as 1830, and now it's a piece of oak with teeth marks on it.
Don't worry, Sam, invoices in the post.
So yeah, it's the Sam Stocks pet care line coming in. So anyway, catch up with Sam. He really should be watching this. He should be on holiday. Mark Potter is in there. Who else have we got? I think I'm going to be a DJ the Lucky One. Hey DJ the Lucky One, I'm glad. I think we've sorted out your account on the website, so hopefully everything's cool with that. If not, drop me a message and we can sort it out. Skegatron, Awesome Shreves is in there. He's gone actually. He's going to be back in 5 minutes. Left Ever 2503 says hello, and Pankaka Medstite, hello from Sweden. Sound is fine. That's awesome. You know, I can't remember what Pankaka Medstite stands for now, but we actually looked it up at some point. Elster Nation is in there. Kablams is in there as well. So let's just get on with the show, I think. Oh, Frank Storm saying hello. Rive Hummel says base to base measuring. I'll build out Thang branches like 5 inches to be able to pile in more models. Okay. RIP Mystic Shield nerf with only re-rolling one. Okay, let's cover that. And only one mortal wound from Arcane Bolt. What else have we got? Brush for Hire. Daryl introduced me to Sigmar last week. Hope to grow my Maggotkin army and play many more games. That's Brush for Hire, so that's cool. Maggotkin are awesome. And Batsy the World says hello. Right, let's get on with this. I think let's get over to what we're about to look at. And I think the first thing we were going to cover, we've had a bit of a chat building up before this show, and what we've done is pick. There's a hell of a lot to cover. So we've picked up some of the stuff that we probably thought was, you know, the stuff we wanted to focus on really from this release. I think before we get into the detail, one of the conversations we were having, and we didn't go too much into it because we kind of said it's probably saved that for the chat, is how much of a new edition is this in your mind from what you've seen so far? Is this a rule tweak or is this significant? Is this going to be like a different game to play? What do you think?
I think we're going to see some significant change in this. I think it's very much changed it from where the first edition seemed to be a lot of focus on shooting, or at least shooting came to the fore. There's a lot of changes in here that really make close combat very viable, and at least there's a lot of mobility in there, which I'm kind of looking forward to. Yeah,
I mean, I was talking with Jack. We were out walking Khaleesi this afternoon. After I got back from work, we took Khaleesi and Lola together. That was fun. We'll talk about that later. And I was saying to Jack, you know, at what point does it become a new edition? And this is the thing he was kind of saying. You know, is it going to feel dramatically different? Is the gameplay going to be significantly different to the point where, you know, it just feels like a completely different game? And we were trying to find where that line was, and we were saying ultimately if you have to change the way you played your army,
or would you rewrite your list,
then I think you've got a new edition, haven't you, really? You know, as in across all armies. If all armies are going to play different, then everything you've known previously is out the window, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which I'm pretty excited about. I mean, because it is an evolution of the existing system, though. It's not going to feel like you're picking up a completely new game. That's not what we're talking about here. But I think there's enough in what we've seen in these rule previews to say, this is, you know, my armies are going to play quite different now. Okay, let's have a look at command abilities as the first one. It was something that every time a roll went terribly wrong for me, I was hoping that we'd have something like this come into play. I certainly missed it as a 40k player. I certainly missed something along this line for Age of Sigmar. So for me, I'm a happy chappy to see this coming in. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think the thing that every 40k player always thought is, where's my reroll? I want my reroll, and they haven't quite given you that.
I know.
But what they have said is a couple of things. So the two that I'm particularly looking at is at the double. So you can choose to use that after you make the run roll. So even if you're only going to do it if you run poorly, you can then mean that you've treated that run roll as being a 6. And there are some restrictions on having to be close enough to a hero, but that for a combat army is pretty big. And they even point out some units can run and charge, like some of the new Idoneth Deepkin, and that would be huge for them. And the other thing, and now this will be big, is forward to victory, which means that after you make your charge roll, again so it's pretty much, you won't have to commit these command points if you don't want to. You get to re-roll that charge roll, and where that's particularly clutch is where you deep strike in one of your units, and it has to be at least 9 inches away. Well, now that was quite difficult to get a 9, but if you're then choosing, oh, actually, I just need to re-roll this, then you can, and especially now, and we'll get onto this a little bit later, where you can't shoot out of combat. I think that's going to be really important for trying to tie up those really heavy-hitting shooting units.
For me, that forward to victory is significant. If I say take Fire Slayers, you know, if I take my big units that pop up in first turn and they're 9 inches away and I really need that charge, and bear in mind that with a musician I can re-roll 1 dice. So vast majority of the times I'm fairly confident about that 9 until you drop that 1 and a 2 and you go, actually I can't actually make 9. It doesn't matter which dice I re-roll, I can't make the 9 inch. And then you were doomed. So the point now, that significant first turn where I really want that charge to go off, I can just throw in a forward to victory. I've already got a character. I've already got a hero within 12 inch, or within 6 inch, sorry. Because to actually do that volcanic pop-up, the lava pop-up, I've got to have a rune smiter next to me anyway. So I'm guaranteed to have that hero next to it. And I can just sort of, in that 50-50 time where it happens, where I can't even get the roll with a single dice, I can now go for both dice and at least, you know, go for it again. So yeah, pretty important for the Fire Slayers, certainly. Okay.
Yeah, and I think there, like we're talking about there about charging out after deep strike, but to be fair, for any melee unit, was that getting that charge off was absolutely clutch, and it was so heartbreaking to be like 4 inches away or 5 inches away, fail the charge, and then watch your unit get devastated the next turn.
Yeah, yeah.
And you kind of feel like that's not how that should have gone. So I think this will help even that out and stop those sort of things from happening.
Of course, these command abilities, as it says here, they're all about having a hero nearby, and that probably leads us quite nicely then into, you know, shooting. I know we've got a little bit to look at with lookouts, but yeah. Just
before we get into shooting, should we just cover off quickly command points themselves?
Yeah, sure.
Just for anyone who hasn't heard, the way that you get these is you get 1 point at the start of each of your turns. So it's not like 40k where bringing different battalions gives you different amounts. But what it does do is if you bring a War Scroll battalion, you get 1 additional at the start of the game for each battalion you've brought. Now, we don't know if those are going to get repointed in the new edition, but at the moment, you probably only had 1 at the 2 max in a bigger game. So I don't think that'll make a huge amount of difference. No. But what this means is you're going to get these abilities off occasionally. And as before, like you get 1 per turn, and in the same way you could use 1 ability for your general each turn, so that's not going to change. But what it means is you can save up these in early turns and use them to turn the game later.
We're definitely seeing battalions reduced in price on some of the faction focus. You know, I was looking at the Beast Clawed Raider one the other day, and it's saying significant price reduction across the entire army, but also the battalions as well. So expect to see some more variety on the table. So yeah, maybe certainly in some factions we've seen, I think Caradrons, Fire Slayers, Beast Claws have all mentioned relatively significant points reductions. So, which we've got a theory about why that is, but let's jump on. Should we at that then? Should we have a look at shooting?
Definitely.
Maybe before we do, let's just catch up on some of the chat. Ralph saying, well, it's called Age of Sigmar 2, so many changes to the game, you seriously need to take another look at your list. So yes, new army. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, they've called it a version change, but you know, sometimes that version change isn't that significant, is it? Whereas this time it does feel like they've definitely, you know, they're recognising it both with a version change, but also in the fact that the gameplay is going to, you know, really change. The bot 76 says shooting will still remain very strong. The changes to shooting are very minor. The fact that you're still allowed to use ranged and missile weapons while in close combat is just silly. Well, we'll cover that off. That's where we're looking next. Certainly.
I guess the other thing we don't know is how they're going to repoint stuff. So you might find that actually the shooting units go up. And whilst I agree that it feels very powerful to get your combat attacks and your shooting, for some units that's not that significant. For example, Judicators, all their power is in their shooting, and the attacks in melee they get is same, like hits on a 4, wounds on a 4, does 1 damage, no rend. Yeah. So it was a bit minor. But what the real strength was, and I found this playing against Sam at the doubles tournament, was the fact that I completely ignored the beastmen attacking them and was just shooting his characters with the archers across the board. Now you can't do that anymore.
No.
If that shooting is in combat, so I think that will help a bit.
I was guilty. I was definitely guilty of that. I was definitely guilty of that in the tournament, of shooting over the heads of the people you're in combat with. I mean, if we take Fire Slayers, of course, every single one of my dudes has got a little axe that they can throw as well. So I do get that, but it's, you know, it's 4s and 4s. You've got 20 guys in combat. You know, it's maybe 5 shots going through, and there's no rend on those as well. So I think it has an impact. It depends on how effective that shooting unit is. You know, if we take, say, some of the Zangors or something like that, then yeah, that real feels like a Skyfires, feels like a kick in the teeth, doesn't it? So as you've said, let's see what they do with points. Let's see if they reflect that some way. What else have we got? Ralph says, oh god, Matthew Edgeworth says, first edition felt too simple, only a skeleton of a system. The General's Handbook and Battle Tomes added thin layers of extras, whilst the new edition seems to add lots more meat to the skeleton. I think I'd agree with that. This is, you know, this feels like a maturity to the system coming through now, which, yeah, I'm pretty excited about. Okay, let's have a look at this. We've got shooting. So, in specifically as well, they talk about shooting in combat. And the rule is a unit can shoot when it's within 3 inches of an enemy, but if it does so, it can only target enemy units that are within 3 inches of it with its shooting attack. So, you can shoot an enemy unit that is within 3 inches of another friendly unit without penalty. So, no shooting out, but you can shoot in, and you can shoot within the combat.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered that. It is still going to mean what it does mean is your shooting units don't become immediately pointless the second something gets in combat with them, which if you've ever played 40k very much can happen. Your Devastator Marines get charged by even a small unit of Orc boys. They're pretty ineffectual.
Yeah.
Whereas this still means you can do something with those, but only at the unit that you're facing.
I
quite like that as a change.
I think what we have to be careful of doing as well is looking at some of these things in isolation of the rest of the rule system change as well, because, you know, we're seeing a change to pile in, which enables units to be far more mobile in combat. I can certainly see a situation where I'm using that wraparound pile in to not only allow me to shoot the primary target of my combat, but wrapping around the rear of a unit and managing to bubble wrap into 3 inches of a unit held further back and dragging those into combat. Because if you notice, it says a unit can only shoot at a unit, so you've only got to get one guy around the back of an enemy unit, and or around the back of an enemy monstrous creature. And if you can get that one guy within 3 inches of somebody stood off the back of it, then the entire unit can direct its shots over there. So there's still some flexibility.
Yeah, and the next part of this rule I think is really significant, where it says that you can still shoot into combat without any penalty. So if you've got some shooting units which aren't engaged, they can completely shoot into that combat and help out your unit, get rid of the people who charged them.
Yeah,
I agree. Maybe let's see how good that sounds. Pretty good.
Yeah, I've always wondered whether that required some kind of modifier, though. You know, if you're shooting into a combat, whether you should be at -1 or something, a bit like the new rule for Lookout Sir, which we're about to have a look at. But
yeah,
because it does feel like you'd probably stay your hand a little bit if you were piling an arrow in. Although I was listening to one of the Age of Sigmar books while I was painting the other night. I can't actually remember. I think it's book 4 or 5 of the first series of the Age of Sigmar, the Realm Gate Wars, and in that, the Chaos dudes all charge forward towards the Stormcast, confident that if they engage them in combat, then the guys on the wall won't shoot them. And of course, what happens is the guys on the wall just continue shooting down, and the line is, they were so confident of their aim, which I loved. I was like, you see, the rule makes sense.
And certain armies like Skaven just wouldn't care.
Exactly. Okay. Well, we talked very briefly, introduced it there. Lookout Sir. You happy to see this?
Yeah. Definitely. So I think anyone who feels that shooting is perhaps a little bit too powerful at the moment, especially now that, unlike 40k, your characters didn't really have any protection. So it very much felt, especially if you had something like, and I'm always going to use Stormcast as the analogy here, but the Raptors with the long strike crossbows that could just ping people from across the board and take out your key buff-giving characters.
Yeah. Well,
at least now, if they want to do that, they've got to subtract 1 from the hit rolls. And whilst that doesn't sound like huge, for some armies like the Bone Splitters, that's a significant portion of their hits. And for actually, even the units with good shooting, if you -1 from the hit rolls, it stops all of their abilities that go off on a 6 because they can't get a 6.
Good point. Good point.
I think that will actually have more of an impact than perhaps initially you might think.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly there's a lot of stuff that does more damage on a 6.
Yeah, or does mortal wounds on a 6.
Yeah, Ah, great stuff. There's a couple of comments come in. Shooting into combat should have a chance of hitting your own troops. And that was from Bod76 and Chaos Sponge, who mirrored exactly the same within a split second. I think that's what I was talking about as a minus modifier. I think any kind of mechanic that says, okay, if you get 3 hits into a combat, you've got to allocate 50% of them to your own unit or something like that. It just becomes an awkward mechanic, and it probably...
Or you just say every roll of a 1 hits your own unit. Something
yeah,
like that.
But even so, you're then making different saves. You know, it's okay. So the wound roll's unified at least, so it'd be fairly quick. But you've still got to allocate saves out and think about that extra stage. I do think, you know, if we're going to see anything in future editions, they tend to prefer a modification of what's going off rather than an alternative. So let's modify it. Let's not have an alternate outcome. So
streamline it.
Yeah, streamline it. But I'm with the sentiment, certainly. The fact that it's completely risk-free, you know, a modifier would at least say, well, do I want to shoot those guys at -1, or do I want to shoot those guys at no modifier over there that aren't engaged in combat? It would make you think twice, wouldn't it, before just piling the shots in?
Yeah. And one thing I didn't mention on the counter there is the fact that your hero has to be within 3 other or more models, within 3 inches of those models. So it means you can't just leave him 12 inches a foot away, but you've got some other units close or anything like that. No, you actually have to keep them somewhat near the bulk of your army.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think that mechanic has grown on me over, say, the 40k mechanic of, you know, you can't shoot a character unless they're the closest unit, which can be gamed so easily, can't it? You know, that kind of half an inch closer with one guy, and you just ignore the character. You know, it's... You know, I quite like this. You know, it's more about hiding your guys amongst the rabble than it is about, you know, distance.
And of course, it doesn't apply if your hero is also a monster. So there's no hiding Archaon behind that unit of Chaos Marauders. It's not going to cut it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, there's not a lot more to add to Lookout, sir, is there really, I suppose?
That's a simple enough mechanic.
It's a simple enough mechanic. It's going to be better than we had, certainly. What else have we got going off here? Right, okay. I'm slightly... This one for me, Pink, I've not covered this as much, so I might have to rely on you a little bit. So this is magic, casting, and unbinding. So what's your thoughts? Because you brought this one up.
No. So... I think these are good changes. I know it divides people, and I think it depends what armies you play. So the things which are a bit contentious is that they've nerfed Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield. Yeah. And I think that's actually potentially a good thing for the game. The reason being is that no matter what spells your wizards knew from their own abilities and your own book, you would almost inevitably use these 2 spells. Which was kind of good because it balanced things, because everyone had those abilities, but also made games quite samey, because if you could cast 2 abilities, you'd probably forsake your own special ability and just use both of these. So the way it works now is that Mystic Shield just gives you rerolls of 1, something that actually a lot of creatures already have. Like, for example, any, and sorry guys, but any Stormcast unit that has a shield already rerolls 1s. Yeah. So if you've got that, Mystic Shield's not doing anything for you. And Arcane Bolt has changed in that it's only going to do 1 mortal wound unless you get that 10 or above, in which case you'll do D3, where you used to do D3 or... no, that was it. You used to do just D3. I'm thinking of 40k, where you can do D6, I think, if you cast high enough. Yeah. So... But what this means is that you'll be relying on those special flavorful spells, and of course we'll get onto this in a little bit. We've got those new eternal spells coming up, or endless spells. Sorry. Yep. And that will make a big difference. And the second thing they've changed with the magic phase is that they've increased the range of unbinding. So you can now unbind within 24 inches. Oh, sorry, it's 30 inches, wow, up from 18 inches, meaning that actually you've got a good chance of having one of your own casters in range to deny that. Because I think what a lot of people felt was that these magic armies would keep you at range and just pepper you with mortal wounds. Yeah. Tzeentch was especially good at that. Yeah, And by the time you got close enough to even do anything, you had nothing left.
Yeah,
Whereas
I mean,
having a 30-inch range, they use the example on the community article of just having like a Sigor in the Chaos Force gives you 2 unbinds and means you actually do mortal wounds to the casters when you manage to pull this off.
yeah.
So I think that was huge.
I can see a Sigor getting added to Sam's force at some point.
Sam's going to be crying now that he's built it as a Gorgon. I can see the look on his face right now. He's going to be like, no, I'm not painting another one.
I think you're absolutely right. For me, Unbind, when I was playing with Rachel at the tournament, and she had the Slan Mage, who I think can Unbind at 32-inch even. Or it's anywhere on the table in line of sight. And that came in handy so many times. You know, when you're up against so much magic as well, it was really useful to have that.
Yeah. If you only had one caster and your enemies had 2 or 3, they just had to say, well, I'll use the ones far away from you, and you can't even do anything about what I'm doing. And this is a much better chance to be able to sort of hold that off a bit.
Yeah, because there was this initial response, wasn't there? This is going to be the addition of magic, and I think we are going to see more magic on the table. I think it's something they want, so it's no surprise. But it's not that they've done it without any kind of counter. They've improved your ability to deny as well. You know, and it's down to the dice gods then, isn't it? You know, it's you can roll to pass the spell, but you know, there's so many times I get off a magic ability with a 6 or a 7. You know, that's your average roll. You're not always rolling the 10 and 12, and it's impossible to unbind, is it? You know?
No. And I think Sam in the chat's actually brought up something interesting, something I didn't actually realise. So he said that the extra realm laws, so the extra spells which depend on different realms of magic or realms of existence, you can choose those, and it isn't necessarily based on the realm you're fighting in. I thought it was. But what it means is you can actually have these spells ahead of time, and again, it just adds more variety to the game. Then you're not always relying on that Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield. Yeah,
and those 6 spells again significant, because you know I'll take a lot of my let's take Sylvaneth for instance, and you look at the Branch Wraith. The Branch Wraith, I quite like the model, but the spell felt useless. I can't remember what the spell actually does. I've got a horrible feeling it summons, which is one of the reasons why I probably thought it was useless, because you just, you know, I was never going to, you know, the summoning with Sylvaneth is 2d6 models, and you just don't go there, you know, because
you're always going to get 2.
You're always going to get 2 when you've paid for the full unit, so don't do it. So it never got used, but you know, at least now I think there's loads of times where that frees that unit up as a magician. You know, as a spellcaster, I've now got something more I can do with that model, and you know, back to its combat abilities and stuff. I actually quite like the Branch Wraith. Never play it. Now I'm probably going to see more Branch Wraiths on the table as opposed to the Branch Witches. So quite pleased about that. Okay, right. Where is there anything else on the chat before we move on? Steve Forrest says he loves the new magic. A lot of magic, more magic. Love it. The Bod 76 says every failed wound could hit your own troop, for example. I mean, that is one mechanic, and it would be funny to see Grots or Bone Spitters firing on their own units, because, let's face it, they do more damage against their own units, which would be kind of funny and thematic. What else have we got? Slippy Tiger says, going from a vampire-heavy lob list to dispossessed, I'm enjoying not having to worry about spells all the time. Well, I mean, that's the other thing isn't it? You know, it's there's Jack has picked up the Daughters of Cain book, and he got to the back section of that, and he was like, "Oh boy, this is 40k." You know, he was like, I mean, he's excited. Don't get me wrong, he's excited about them, but at the same time, there's a lot going off in the back of that book, outside of just the unit sheets. Okay.
See, I felt the magic was always a phase that I really missed out on, and I wished that I had something for. So I am super excited for the new models coming out, because 1, they look awesome.
Yeah.
And 2, I'm getting Stormcast Wizards.
Yeah, I know.
And that's something I never thought I'd say.
I just keep thinking of the Sigmar cartoon of him just punching the
that's amazing. That was so
the hell I can. That needs to be a t-shirt. That needs to be bigger than two thin coats.
Please.
You know.
I would buy that t-shirt.
Ralph says the realm lore is fluffish. You get an army from Shyish like the Night Haunts with their spells lore going through a realm gate, let's say, to a Kishi, Aski, I can't remember how to Ashi, and they take their lore with them. You know what? That is a point. That is a point, because at first that felt a little bit odd that you'd be taking different realm magic, but if you're jumping through realm gates, that makes sense.
It's a part of them.
Yeah, like it. Okay, what else have we got? Endless spells. I don't know too much about this, but I'm definitely excited about the models. So, what are endless spells? You know what, Pink? Go on then. Do you want to talk through this?
Okay, so basically, this is the whole idea that a spell isn't just something that you're supposed to imagine happening or just has an immediate effect. It's now going to get represented with a model, and this isn't all about damage. So, in the article the Warhammer community did about this, you can see a giant fanged maw rushing towards some Seraphon, and by the way, that model looks amazing. And then in front of the Seraphon, there's some sort of crystalline wall that's been thrown up.
Some kind of weird shield.
That's going to disrupt charges. Don't know what it does against other spells. Might stop it.
Don't know whether it can move around.
And they talk about even like healing your own units and things like that. So I can't wait to see what sort of things they bring to this. And every article, every faction focus we seem to get, quite often there's a new one of these endless spells previewed in there, and every one of the models so far just looks amazing. There's a weird one that looks a little bit like a sea mine with a skull face on it. That
is the Purple Sun of Shyish, which is one of the so it's got a few abilities. It's predatory, which means it moves 9" and can fly. So this thing pops around the table. It's got a few abilities. Swirling Death, which is when the model's set up, player who sets it up can immediately make a move with it. End Given Form. That's after the model has moved. Each unit that any models has any models passed over, and each unit that is within 1 inch of it at the end of its move is subject to the Purple Sun's baleful energies. So this is for it. You roll a dice for models equal to the number of models in the unit, and on a 6+, the model in that unit is slain. Slain, Mr. Pink. So that's just, if the unit has wound characteristics of 6 or more, it suffers 2d6 mortal wounds. So even pretty tough things that are sat there with 6 wounds or more have a chance of getting popped off the table. You know, the average.
I wondered about how to read this one, because what it suggests to me is it could be either two ways. One means that you have to roll the dice, and if you get the 6, then that big monster takes 2d6 mortal wounds. Or does it just mean you don't even roll the dice, and just if you're near the sun and you're a big monster, you take 2d6 mortal wounds?
No, I think you have to roll the 6 and it's slain, but if it's got a wound characteristics of 6 or more, you then do 2d6. It's the damage, it's the 2d6 mortal wounds. Otherwise, that would be crazy.
It used to do that. The Purple Sun of Xeris used to be, I think, an initiative check.
Really?
And because Glotkin had initiative 1, it just you couldn't pass it. So it just used to immediately give. It just took out the Glotkin, which is amazing.
Just to say, Sam's off to bed. So good night, Sam. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. Khaleesi's fine. Right, okay then. We've also got the Visage of Xeris. So the previous reference coming in here. Subtract 1 from bravery characteristics of all units that are within 6 inch of the model. And if your battle is taking place, this is empowered by Shyish. If it's in the realm of death, the model can move 12 inch instead. Now this is the interesting thing about endless spells. Once they've been cast, they are moved by the player who's taking the first turn. In the turn, the first player sequence. So the idea is this: you can have these things. You could cast it in turn 1 and have it used against you in turn 2 if you're cheekily trying to go for the double turn by choosing the second play. So it's an interesting one. We've now got a mechanic that encourages you to move away from that, if you like, to actually take the first turn and control these endless spells.
Well, you've got to think that the turn that you cast this, it's going to be very close to your own battle lines. And if you then give them the first turn instead of yourself, They're just going to turn it around and slam it straight back into you.
Exactly. Particularly if you're casting this in the magic phase, which means you've got movement afterwards. You may well have followed this up the field. You know, there's a good chance of that. One thing that I'm not sure I picked up the first time I read this is Balewind Vortex is now an endless spell and has received a complete rules overhaul. So if we go with Balewind Vortex, let's assume you can still balance your dude on top of it. One would assume so. It might not, by the way. It might not be a bonus to the wizard anymore. But I do like the idea that this could be dispelled, because endless spells can be dispelled.
Yeah.
So I do like the idea that if somebody's popped their wizard on top and made them all powerful and impossible to reach, you know, all the things that came with the Balewind Vortex, now you can actually say, well, I'm just going to turn that off first and then have a go at the wizard that was balancing precariously on top. That's assuming at least it's contained some of the original rule, because it does say it's had a rules overall in line with the rest of the spells.
To be fair, it was very, very good for any sort of magic casters. The ability to double your range, I think it was for both casting and dispelling, meant in something like a Zinch list, this was so powerful. And there was even ways, even after they said you couldn't cast it with, I think, a monster, the Zinch list had something called a change coven, which meant once per turn, I think, you could switch 2 models. So they used to cast it with a little herald and then switch with the Lord of Change, and suddenly you had a Lord of Change on top of that thing. And that was nuts.
How nice to play that game. Matthew Edgeworth has just pointed out, I actually got that backwards. So you take turns, so they're moved at the start of the battle round after determining who gets first turn, with players taking it in turns to pick a spell and move, starting with a player that has the second turn that round. So you maybe have to move any endless spell with this move, not just the ones you control, representing their untamed nature. So actually, that's not quite the same as I was thinking. Yeah, that feels like it's not quite the discouragement I was looking for in that one. But there you go. Yeah. Must have that must have been one of.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, I think that was one of those cases. That's what I was hoping for.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, right. What else have we got? Measuring and piling in. So I was pretty excited about this, particularly with my Fire Slayers. So fundamentally, what is the change to measuring and piling in? Well, it's gone base to base, which, as far as I'm aware, 90% of players played base to base anyway. Yeah.
No, everyone. I think even in Warhammer's own tournaments.
Yeah.
They said just use the bases. It's not like the start of the game where I think someone, to prove a point, put something like one of their heralds on like 100 mil base and said you cannot now get into combat with it because you can't get your model close enough.
Yeah.
Bases always made sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone over to that, which is all good and wonderful in the world. I actually think that whole measuring from model to model was simply a mechanic designed to create uproar around having to rebase your model. I think that's what that was in there for. You know, there was people with vast armies on square bases.
Yeah,
and
it meant that it didn't matter.
Yeah,
it meant that you could be on square or round, and it gave you no advantage whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it just made it quite clunky, quite awkward. It also meant stuff like, if I've got a tree lord with his staff out and I turn him 90 degrees, has he now moved several inches and stuff like that? So
yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, I saw plenty of dispossessed armies at the tournament on 20 mil square bases.
Yeah,
who had a wonderful time when it come to the range of the attacks once they piled in.
They must have got everyone in.
Okay, so let's have a look at piling in. This is the thing I'm quite excited about. A unit can make a pile in move if it's within 3 inches of an enemy unit or has made a charge move in the same turn. If this is the case, it can move each model in the unit up to 3 inch. Each model must finish its pile in move at least as close as the model, as close to the nearest enemy model as the start of the move. So the big change here now is it's not got to get closer, it can be at least as closer. And as they say here, essentially, this means that even though you're in base-to-base combat, you can now shuffle those models around a little bit.
Huge change.
I think I'm pretty happy about this. I'm so happy about this. I actually played around with some graphics. So let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. Okay, so there's a few games. Bear in mind that most of my recent games have been Fire Slayers. They're on 32mm bases. They have a 1-inch attack. And it's difficult to get, if you like, any more than a single row to attack. And in particular, there's so many instances where, because you can't flow around the model, you end up bogged down. So, you know, here I'm representing a successful charge. The blue 32mm base is the one that succeeded in the charge, getting within a ½ inch. The rest are a scattering of models around it. And what I'm showing there is, you know, effectively what a 3-inch pile-in move would achieve. These are all to scale, so that's a 32mm base and that's a 120mm oval base. And for those of you who are thinking which one is that one, that's essentially the monster base. It's the kind of thing you see Beastclaw Raiders do. It's what the flying base is. So, you know, the standard large flying base for, you know, for big flyers and those kind of things. So in the past, what would have that meant if we'd have piled in? Essentially, I'd have been able to get that front row in fairly comfortably, but as we can see there, fulfilling that 3-inch move, I can get 7 guys in combat. Fire Slayers are famously resilient. They tended not to die too much, you know, so they'd be stuck around. And actually, in many respects, that became a bit of a bane, because what I couldn't do is remove from the front to enable a kind of flowing pile in. What I'd have to do is try and get that second rank to move around. And what I'm showing here is even with a 3-inch pile in, actually the closest guy there at 32mm base would be moving further away. So that's an illegal move. I couldn't do that. And whilst I might be able to pick this one up and, you know, and move into this gap here, okay, I can kind of achieve that in a 3-inch move. That's going to be 2 pile-ins before they can actually get close to the enemy, close enough to attack. So, you know, you're 2 rounds of combat before you're even kind of starting to reform the unit in any serious way. Yeah, if we just reset that unit and then show what a 3-inch flow around pile-in move it looks like, you know, it's quite significant. As you can see, I've gone from 7 people being able to attack, 7 models being able to attack, to what, 8, 9, 10, 11 models able to attack there. And I think for me though, that's great. It feels far more thematic. The models flowing around some enemy beastie trying to bring it down, or pushing forward from the back, and the other guys flowing around the back of the model, makes absolute perfect sense to me. But I do think as well, there were times when, once you've hit base to base, those models became immovable, and you couldn't do anything at all to reposition them, and you ended up in some really weird situations where here I'm showing what you can actually do is to start to shuffle some of those ranks around and create gaps. And the reason I'm interested in creating those gaps is because actually, if I can create a bit of a gap on the 32mm base and then tuck that second rank in, I can get that second rank within 1 inch of even a large base. I mean, if there are other 32mm bases, then I'm onto an absolute winner, because I can also reposition my bases to lock in between the enemy bases. So we create that nice grid pattern, really closing up that 1 inch gap. But as you can see, in the case of 1 pile in, I've gone from 7 to the entire unit being able to attack. That's, you know, 15 models in this case. So I think that's a big shift for me, for my combat units, definitely, especially for those units on 32mm bases, which, you know, I'm talking Dryads, I'm talking Fire Slayers, we're talking, I think, Nurgle, the Plague Bearers. I'm not actually quite sure what's on a 25mm round base anymore. There must be some stuff out there.
I think some of the demons were.
Yeah. I certainly, I know that the Nurgle the Plague Bearers come on 32mm now. In all the new sets, they came on 32mm. Anyway, so
it makes sense.
Either way, I'm pretty happy with how that works. I think I just wanted to show one more scenario, because once you get like scenery involved as well, you know, then the field changes quite significantly, and this has happened certainly on the last 3, 4 or 5 battle reports. The game has been changed significantly because of the inability for the attacking larger units to be able to kind of maneuver once they've hit combat. So I'm showing here a unit kind of approaching a narrow valley, if you like, between 2 pieces of scenery. You know, you perform your pile-in move, manage to get, what, 6, 7 models in combat there. But once I'm there, until I start to take casualties and be able to remove some of those and then flow the models through, there's not a lot I can do about that combat. You know, I can't necessarily squeeze someone in from the back. Even if I lost one, I could probably get that one model through there maybe, and then throw 2 or 3 more around it. But as we can see, you know, if we go into the new way of piling in, you know, in one pile in, I've just gone from what, you know, I had something like 7 in combat there. I mean, realistically, we're getting a hell of a lot more in combat. We're pulling the same technique at the back there of creating gaps between the 32mm bases to put that second rank in combat. Yeah, there's still a few out, but this is one pile in now. You know, one pile in after the initial round of combat. Whereas before, you know, I've been locked in combat with like 5 models being able to hit a beastie and 15 models sat behind. And it's not just about not being able to get the attacks off. It just means that becomes a set feature of the game. You know, that combat just goes on for 5 turns. You know, they're chipping away at my models, and at the same time, I'm not getting any more. So you just chip a few wounds away at each other throughout the whole game. And it really sometimes just brought the game dynamic to a halt. You ended up with these pots of activity around the table that didn't really progress. So for me, I'm pretty excited about this one, because I think it's something I've wanted for a while, particularly with the combat armies. We've talked about shooting still being strong. We've talked about magic being strong. But if you're a decent combat army with multiple attacks, Fire Slayers have 2 attacks with their axes. You know, so any of those numbers I've just shown you, you're timesing that by 2 for your attacks. Makes me a pretty happy bunny.
Yeah, and I talked to you before, didn't I? Like, this is all using the assumption that you would get the charge off and that you were initially doing the wraparound.
Yeah.
If you got charged and you were on the big bases and you weren't particularly spread out in a line, you suddenly had a lot of your unit being able to do absolutely nothing. Whereas now they're all going to get to pile in and wrap around, and it just makes sense. Otherwise, half your unit was just standing back cheering on their mates, really.
Yeah.
But this will be a big change.
I think there's one last significant piece at the end there. What base should I use? And I think they've given one of those answers that ultimately they've given a 2-part answer, and I think the reality is for the vast majority of the time everybody's going to listen to the second part. So essentially they say you can use any base whatsoever, but for the sake of clarity we're going to, you know, release a list of standard base sizes. And you know, if you're a tournament organizer and you want to ensure a consistent standard across your event, feel free to use this. And I think anytime they kind of do that, here's a standard, the reality is most people just fall in on that. I think though it does at least enable you to say, you know what, I want to put my hero on some kind of thematic base, and you can have a debate with your players at the local club. And of course, if it's not an official tournament, then you're absolutely within your rights to use whatever base you want. You know, so that's cool. You can at least do these thematic bases, you know, which, by the way, check out Sam's tutorial for swamp bases on wargameronline.com, because I think it's one of the best bases he's ever done. It's absolutely stunning, so check that out. But yeah, I think people are just going to fall in with the standard base size chart,
well,
really.
I've seen a lot of people on the chat are saying that tournaments have to go to these, but that's not true. They've said that if you're a tournament organizer, feel free to use this.
If
and
you
actually,
want. Yeah.
Where people are saying who uses square these days, we actually saw a Warhammer's own doubles tournament, quite a few of the older armies on square bases, and they were absolutely fine by it. And I think you'll find that most people don't care.
Yeah.
We always think about sort of min-maxing and everything like that, but in most places, you're never going to turn to the guy who's beautifully sculpted this army over the last 10 years and tell him that he's basing for advantage when it's clearly not true.
Yeah,
The other thing they might do, and what people might do, is say feel free to use larger bases. Like you said, you might want to do a scenic base, but you might not be allowed to go down a base size, which will give you advantage.
Well, I mentioned the Dispossessed army on square bases, which was really great for combat. But, you know, at the end of the day, that Dispossessed army was seriously old school. And it had probably been on those bases for older than most of the people in the tournament, you know. So there's no way I'd expect that player to rip those wonderful models that were so well painted off of those bases just to conform to a round base. It's like, I get it. I wouldn't do that. But you know what? Good on you for bringing your models and playing anyway, you know.
a lot of tournaments are just happy to get people playing at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. I dare say as you get to the kind of, like you say, I mean, strangely enough, the tournament we did turned out was meant to be kind of the more competitive tournament, wasn't it?
Yeah,
but it was so relaxed. Yeah, they didn't tell us before we got there, but
no.
It was actually pretty relaxed. Everybody was there having good fun, weren't they? You know, so you know, I think if that's the general model, then that's okay. I'm sure there are going to be some serious competitive edge events where, you know, they'll lay the law at you have to use the standard base chart. You know, that will make sense. And it's there. They've given it for people to use, so I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
Okay, any more comments? A lot of Dispossessed are on smaller bases. Arkanaut Company are on smaller ones too. Good point. They're on 25 mil, aren't they? Skeletons and Zombies are on 25. Yeah, there is a few, isn't there? Definitely. Skeletons and Zombies, though, they need to be on 25 mil just so I can hit more of them. It doesn't make any sense, but it feels like it makes sense. Let's get blast templates back in the game.
Oh, I'd love that.
Okay, right. What else have we got in there? I think I saw someone saying hello. Demon Lizard from Outer Space saying hello. So, hey, Demon Lizard from Outer Space, thanks for joining us.
Great name.
Okay, what else have we got in the rules? Where are we at time? We've got 9 minutes to go, Mr. Pink. So, what do you fancy covering? We've got a few more tabs open here, but should we cover summoning?
Yeah, let's do summoning, because I think this is potentially a bit of a contentious one. Some people are really looking forward to it. Some people are a little bit wary. I don't think it's going to be as impactful as people think, but it'll be interesting to see what people in the comments think.
Yeah. So, I think this comes back to the comment I made earlier, and again, this is a dog walking chat with Jack. He was just going to go, people are just going to spam summoning units. First and foremost, whilst it's free, it's not completely free. There's conditions you have to fulfill. So let's get that out there. It's not just I can do as many as I want. There will be conditions you kind of have to fulfill. You're just not paying for them, you know, in terms of your unit cost. What we've also seen, as far as Beastclawed Raiders, Fire Slayers, and I think also Kharadron Overlords, is mentioning their faction ones as significant point releases. I'm not 100% convinced that that's not beyond coincidence to say they are units that can't summon. They are factions that cannot summon. So I think maybe Games Workshop are looking at those factions that can't bring any extra models into the game and enabling you to bring more models in from turn one. So again, certainly one we shouldn't judge out of context of seeing the handbook for 2018, because then we'll have a better picture about how they've addressed that for the factions that don't summon. And as we've said, this isn't a free action, isn't it? Have you got some examples there, Pink, about how they could be summoned?
Yeah, exactly. So they've straight up said this is not magical spells. You can't just cast this off from turn one. There'll be each army that can summon will have their own unique resource. So, for example, if you've got Khorne, think the Blood Tithe, killing units or units dying will add to that resource. And when you've got enough points, you can summon things in. A lot like how it worked in the Khorne Demonkin book for 40k. They also say stuff like Nurgle would be spreading plague. Slaanesh has to do damage with their heroes to units but not kill them, so only doing some wounds. So you can see how it's not quite as easy to get these resources as you might initially think. I think what you'll really see is these armies might pull up an extra unit or two towards the middle to late game, and that might help you secure that key objective. Don't get me wrong, it might have a big impact, but I don't think it's what we saw at the start of Age of Sigmar, which was Nagash summoning up another army.
Yeah. I do like the fact that summoning as well is going to be thematic now to the army as well. It's not just everybody casts a spell. You know, there are going to be things in line with, you know, as they say themselves here, you know, if I can find the line now, you know, calling a Khornate demon is nothing like raising undead or summoning a Seraphon. So, you know, why should they be the same in the game? So again, I like the fact that this is going to add flavour to the army, really. I also like, you know, the fact that there are going to be some factions out there that don't summon and just obstinately show up with whoever they're going to play with the whole game. It's like, this is it. There's no more of us. We're here to fight. I like that. I mean, interestingly enough, with those factions and the price drop, you may actually start, looking at those reserve options as a longer term option now. If I was to take Fire Slayers, it's so tempting to, you could put those units into reserve in the magma tunnels. It's so tempting to just bring them in turn 1 and hit hard. Whereas now, if you're already a lot cheaper, so you've got a higher model count than what's already on the table, they've got to summon units in, and it's going to take them a turn or two to spin those up. You can hold back on your own reserves as well. Yeah. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping we see some more dynamism of those units arriving later in the game. For everybody, even the units that can't summon, more about using reserves of that last-minute gambit rather than everybody up front.
That's what I was going to say as well, is I don't think we necessarily know yet, and correct me if I'm wrong, that some armies you think don't traditionally summon won't be able to do something.
Yeah.
Like, you could think Arcanauts just bring in reserves from the Skyfleet, or perhaps for Fire Slayers more come up from the magma tunnels, or more Stormcasts just deep strike in. There's so many ways you could bring in reserves to different armies without having what you think of being traditional summoning.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to wait for a bit more details on this one, but I don't think the world's going to end.
Okay, so Ralph was just saying on the last Stormcast episode they said that armies that don't have summoning will have abilities that enable them to do just that. So there you go.
Nice.
From the mouth of Pink comes wisdom. Matthew Edgeworth says, look at Sylvaneth in first edition, free Wildwoods, you pay the points in the existing models. Summon heavy armies will pay a premium in normal model cost. There you go. Okay, right. Where are we now? We're 4 minutes to. Have we got time for one more, do you think? Or shall we have a quick look at the chat?
I think let's wrap it up with the chat.
Let's wrap it up with the chat. CM says, my Carnosaur is on the square base and I have no desire to rebase it. It's modelling like a T-Rex emerging from a jungle behind a guy on a toilet. Never rebase that. You're good to go as you are. Absolutely. Ralph says summoning is a game changer, particularly in turns 3 and 5. Well, I kind of hope so. This is what I'm saying. I kind of hope we see, because sometimes if everything happens up front and then it's whoever's on the table longest wins, we might see that dynamic changing a little bit now. We might see that last minute comeback through summoning units in and doing cool stuff like that. Awesome Streve says, I see you guys. So I think he's heading off, or at least he's saying goodbye to us because he knows we're very close to the end of the show. But thanks for joining us anyway. What else have we got going off? Thordelim's just joined us at the very end. Thordelim, but you're here and that's what counts. Bod76 says, magnetize square bases and stick the square base onto a 32mm round base would work. I've seen conversion kits, that sort of little semicircle shapes that you stick onto the edge of your square base to convert them to round bases. So I have seen people doing that.
But it can only ever make them larger round bases.
Yeah, but in most cases that was the case, wasn't it? You had 15mm, you had 20mm, 25mm square base, and a 25mm square base made into a 32 round. I think it works. I think if I remember rightly. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe the corners would poke out. There's one for a diagram in future. Think might have to create an in-scale diagram or even a product. Okay, I tell you what, we're at 2 minutes to, but unless we're going to start talking about anything else, maybe the best thing to do is just say thank you for everyone to come along. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you, Mr. Pink, for joining me. Sorry I missed Monday Musing last week, but we're back, and like I said, I think actually for the next few weeks this might be the format. I think it makes more sense when there's a couple on here talking, and with so much going off in Age of Sigmar and so many cool releases in 40k, I'm pretty excited about the new Knights. I'm pretty excited about the Gene Stealer cult models we saw previewed as well. So there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff going off, and I think it makes more sense.
Orcs might be good again.
Oh my goodness, you've got orcs, haven't you?
Yes, I haven't played these orcs in like 2 years.
Are they on square bases?
a giant stomper square base.
Right, that's it. We're getting the orcs out. We're going to have a battle report, without a doubt.
Done.
Okay, right. Let's call it a night of that. Thank you everyone for coming along. Thank you for everyone who's supporting us. There's a whole bunch of stuff been going off on the community Facebook page, but also a bunch of stuff going off in the forums at wargameronline.com as well. So go along and check that out. Loads of people have been posting up over the last few weeks. We'll do a review of that in the next couple of weeks as well. We're also going to be running a series of giveaways as well, so keep tuned for that. There's a couple of battle reports going up. We might do a live one this week if I can get some players together. Other than that, have a great week. I hope you've enjoyed the Monday, and we'll see you all again soon. Thanks all.
Bye guys.